Welcome to UNCAGED, a show that celebrates thought leadership from today's top business leaders. The program provides a voice to amazing executives from around the globe who are shaping the world of business today and mapping the path to the commerce of tomorrow. Today, we're speaking with Scott Hutcheson. Hey, Scott, how are you?
Good, Bant. How are you?
I'm very, very well. I'm excited to talk to you today, Scott, about transformation and all of the things associated with that. And we'll get to that in a second. Scott is the professor at Purdue University. He is also the founder of Hutcheson Associates, which is a business that helps leaders design, grow, and strategically transform organizations, communities, and ecosystems to make them more adaptive, innovative, and competitive. And we'll get more into what's happening and what the latest is with Hutcheson Associates in a second. But before we do that, Scott, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your career?
Yeah, sure. So it kind of all goes back to the early 90s. In fact, right about 1990, where I got out of school and kind of took my first big boy job. It happened to be with American Airlines. And I wasn't there long before I got put on a pretty interesting project. It was an IT development project. Where American and Hilton, Marriott, and Budget were coming together to build a new system, a reservation system for hotels and rental car companies, kind of piggybacking on the success that American had in developing Sabre, which was the reservation system, and still
legendary.
Exactly, yes. Right? So that same development team, I had done some front desk work in hotels. So when I kind of landed, they were looking for some people with some daily experience in either of those industries. So I drew a straw that put me on that team. And that happened to be a very pivotal project because it was at the time one of the largest software development projects that had ever been attempted. $115 million budget, 400 on staff, and a 4-year development timeline. Wow. And to kind of rush you to the end of the story, it failed. The system didn't work. It never worked. The partnership was disbanded. It might still be in the courts. Who knows? But it was both disillusioning for me as your first kind of job, but also got me reflecting on that scenario and why big projects like that fail. And I got really interested in less in the technology side of things. And as it turns out, it wasn't a technical issue. It was an organizational culture issue. It was a leadership issue. It was a clash of cultures and not really having a good disciplined way to collaborate. So that's what really struck my young mind. And I said, I want to learn more about that. So I decided to structure that learning with continued education. I decided to go back to school and ended up with a master's and a PhD, where I looked at how these kind of complex collaborations succeed or fail, kind of regardless of the industry space that they're in or the way technology may change, kind of that organizational behavior and human behavior side of that kind of work. So that led me into both an academic career and a career outside of the university, helping other leaders deal with complex challenges like that.
Yeah, I think that that skill set and developing that skill set is tremendously valuable. I also think it's probably so critical to think through that element before actioning those types of projects. I've been part of some of those types of projects in my career, and some are successful, some are not successful, and they're not successful for reasons that I would not have predicted, right? I worked on one of those types of projects that you just outlined, where it was a multinational, multi-company initiative. And each company, it was such a high priority, each company allocated relatively senior up-and-coming superstars to the project. And at first that sounded excellent, but as the project kind of continued to go on, each and one of these superstars realized that because they were out of the structure of the hierarchy at their parent companies, that they were getting passed over for opportunities, that they weren't seen as critical anymore. it killed the project because everyone, they all bailed. They all wanted to go back. So I would not have thought about that as being a problem initially. So I think that this work is really interesting. And I can see that Hutcheson Associates really works on these issues for companies. Tell me a little bit more about the type of work that you guys are doing.
Yeah, so I founded Hutcheson Associates a couple of years ago to kind of better organize the kind of the side consulting I'd been doing for years, but wanted to formalize that more and have a structure so I could bring other partners in to serve clients. And I still find myself working in highly technical industries, the tech sector, for instance, but on the technology side of, of banking and of manufacturing and that sort of thing. And some of the same sorts of issues, those issues related to collaborating across boundaries, whether those are intra-organizational boundaries. How does a big company innovate across their silos inside? But increasingly, how do we collaborate and innovate in an open innovation sort of system with others? Kind of what we were trying to do with those 4, global companies back in the day. And what I found through my kind of research and teaching on the university side is there are new emerging frameworks. It seems like we've got agile everything, but an agile approach to kind of strategic transformation.
Wow.
With some colleagues, we developed a discipline that we call strategic doing, a much more experimental, collaborative approach to strategy, more so than the traditional command and control strategic planning sorts of models. So I work a lot with companies using that discipline, teaching kind of a new set of skills of agile leadership and collaborative leadership. And how do you relatively quickly identify shared value opportunities, and then began a series of experiments to figure out if your hypotheses are correct. We think if we do this, we'll create enough value for all of us to be happy and be profitable, but we don't really know. So how do you, in a measured way and a way to take a little bit of risk, but also mitigate that risk, move in an agile, iterative way toward transformation?
Yeah, I love that. Is that part of the kind of the Agile 2.0 movement in general?
I mean, it sort of is. It really kind of the discipline that we've been developing kind of predates the Agile kind of phenomenon, but we began kind of adopting that language as well because people understand it. But yes, it goes far beyond just Agile software design, right. Which even had that been placed in the 1990s, I think we would have had a better outcome there. But it's really how do we think about everything we do in our business in a much more agile, iterative sort of way. And yeah. I see everything, but not really everything. I mean, it almost seems like our organizations today need kind of 2 operating systems, because there's some business functions that work really well in hierarchical structures where we do need a lot of checks and balances and accountability. But then we also have to innovate and change, and that's a much more horizontal sort of discipline. So our organizations and our leaders really have to be ambidextrous up here and be able to do a better job of saying, well, what is the business outcome, and kind of what's the operating system or the frameworks that are appropriate for this versus this.
I really like the way you're structuring that. In my own business and businesses, I often will say something along the lines of, everything begins with the platform and ends with the platform, because our company, like many companies, is very focused around the technology. And you realize that the technology only works if the organization works around the same principles. And I feel like today, that's where all businesses are headed. Everything is related to those platforms. And I listened to the model that you've developed, and it really seems to support really actioning and bringing that to life.
Yeah, I think so. At least I hope so. And I think my clients recognize that as well. I've worked on a lot of projects where you build a technology platform, but if you don't change your behavior, then the platform's not going to work for you. So it really is, it's taking the same principles that we use to build an ecosystem or a technology platform, how do we have a kind of a behavioral platform that matches that? Because you have to have both.
Now, I mean, it's such an interesting business landscape we're in right now. I look at companies that go from nothing to billion-dollar businesses overnight, these unicorns. I look at billion-dollar businesses go down to $100 million businesses overnight as well. And I'm curious as how this business landscape, these different types of businesses, can apply these types of principles.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun these last few years to work both with startups, but also to work with legacy companies. Purdue has a rich history of working with, large manufacturers that have been around a long time. And if they've been around a long time, they have to have been innovative in reinventing themselves. So, but I see the same dynamics and the same kind of patterns in a startup as you do in a large organization that successfully transforms. And to me, I kind of boil it down. We're all familiar with the technology adoption curve, the S curve, where things start and they scale and they grow. Well, the life of an organization is the same, and what I help organizations do and leaders do is to figure out, all right, well, what are the first signs that this growth curve, this S-shaped growth curve that we've been on is just at the early signs of playing itself out, getting ready to plateau. And then how do we jump to the next S curve? How do we figure out, whether it's helping a company go from on-prem computing to the cloud, or whether it's reinventing what they do for a new market? My mental model is, how do we jump from the S curve that we're on to a new potential S curve, some sort of adjacent reality? So that to me is the common factor. A startup's doing that for the first time. A 100-year-old company is doing it, perhaps for the fourth or fifth time. Mm-hmm. But then those cycles are faster than they used to be.
Right.
With technology advancing quickly, consumer behaviors advancing quickly, we can no longer think about a business cycle as lasting even a decade. We better be thinking about reinvention every 4 or 5 years in some pretty substantial ways, or we're not going to be around that decade.
Yeah. I know you're right. I know you're right. I've been looking at some of these recent stories. I mean, probably what's happening at Facebook right now is going to be the case study of the next decade. Right. I know nobody really talks about it in those terms because there's not a lot of love right now for Facebook in the broader media landscape. But the reality is that, as far as I can see, Zuckerberg is trying to make one of the largest pivots and shifts I've ever seen, for a $500 billion company, right? And he has to pull this off. He didn't kind of go slow and steady, he didn't set up like a separate division just to test this out. He went whole hog. Right. I mean, I'm flabbergasted. My first reaction was like, oh my God, this is a terrible mistake. And then another side of it was how bold, no one's really talking about that because I think he's obviously, as I said, not the most popular person these days, but it's quite an amazing story. We'll see how that one turns out.
It's either going to be the death knell or the genius of Mark Zuckerberg yet again. I'm betting on the genius.
Wow, that's nice. I like to hear that. Well, let me shift gears slightly here. And I wanted to ask you, we've been living through this pandemic over the last couple of years. And as we start to emerge from this, it just be curious, any insights that you've gathered, any learnings that we can start to be applying to creating a better future?
Yeah, I think so. And one encouraging sign that actually I saw a Wall Street Journal article today that I think is illustrative of this. So CIOs, so Chief Information Officers, their salaries have skyrocketed the last 2 years. Good for them. I have some friends that are CIOs, and I have a lot of clients that are CIOs. But I think what that means is their contributions are being valued in a way that they really never have. And in the past, when I would I worked with CIOs, and sometimes their frustration was that they didn't always have an equal seat at the table of strategy, if you will. They were seen as the people that, they just keep our machines running and the network healthy, and they build the internal apps when we need them. No, in a digital world, in a world that has truly been digitally transformed, it is now present tense, not future tense. It's hard to think of a more valuable player than your information technology people. So that I think is the silver lining here. What if we're going to have another roaring 20s, it will be around the elevation of digital technologies within organizations, as not just of traditionally non-digital organizations, if you will, as more than just kind of a secondary player, as a lead character, and that digital and information technologies are going to lead innovation rather than support innovation.
Yeah, it's a really strong point. And I mean, I've seen that, in a lot of organizations. I think the question I'm trying to get my head around is how much will stay and how much will go away as people, I think, crave being together again, and things like that. We'll see how that shapes, and just be curious to see what you think. Maybe focus more on the immediate future, which is now we're living in the brave new world of 2022. How do you see this year evolving, and what are some of the transformational issues that should be top of mind?
Yeah, I think we're moving from a set of what we thought of as either ors to a set of both ands. I mean, I don't, talk about, conferences and event planning. I don't think it's ever going to be, it was all face-to-face. We loved going to conferences, but then we had to do it virtually. The new world will be both. You will have a choice, because there are some people that have thrived in the last 2 years, and there are some people that it's just driven them crazy. Yeah. So whether you're a consumer, whether you're an employee, whether you are, collaborating with someone across town or across the globe, I think it's going to be an either or. Yeah, we might be doing stuff in the metaverse, but it'll never completely replace the face-to-face. I used to travel a lot internationally, and I think I will again, but I might not travel to the extent that I used to. I have friends that are road warriors with the big consulting firms. That model has changed and will completely replace, but I think it's going to be a lot more both ands rather than either ors, in terms of whether it's face-to-face, whether it's digital. And all the other things that cascade from those two different ways of interacting with.
I love that. Both ands. I agree. I think it'll present its own set of challenges and benefits as well. Scott, this has been great to talk to you. We've been having a great conversation with Scott Hutcheson. He is a professor at Purdue University and the founder of Hutcheson Associates. Scott, if someone wanted to reach you, where can they find you?
Well, they could probably find me at Purdue by searching on my name. If somewhere, I imagine the spelling will be there, but it's Hutcheson, first name Scott, traditional spelling. But you can also get me at scotthutcheson.com, and that'll get you to Hutcheson Associates. But if you just Google my name, I'm usually the first one that pops up. There's another guy in Canada with the same name, so we're usually 1 and 2, but I'm pretty easy to find if you know how to spell the name.
Excellent. Well, Scott, thank you for being on the show today, and we appreciate it, and we look forward to having you back.
Great. Thank you.
Cheers.